Hey dev team, welcome back to Flutter with Drag. Let's get straight back into it, and first of all I want to fix a bug. If you look at our emulator at the top event, we're at 2 minutes and 35, and if I hit the restart on the app, give it a second to restart, we go back to 0. That's obviously not correct. Easy to fix though. Let's come along to our timer service and find out what's going wrong. We have got a load function which loads in our data. It then checks to see whether we have an active one, which we have in this case. It then finds out the start time of that event, works out the difference between now and the event in seconds, and stores that in seconds, and then calls the start timer function. Let's come down to the start timer, where we immediately set the seconds to 0. So that's not ideal. We've already set the seconds and we've already calculated it. So why are we setting the seconds to 0 there? Well, start timer is also called when we add a new event. And when we add a new event, we do want the seconds to be reset. So we need to move that, and in our add new, just before we start the timer, we want to set the seconds there to 0, and we don't want to set it to 0 in the actual start timer. So a quick save and a quick refresh, and Bob's your uncle, that little bug has now been eradicated and we're good to go. Okay, next bit I want to tidy up. In our sidebar we have this pause button which does nothing really. It stops the clock, but it doesn't do anything else. It's just going to continue stopping the clock, and the clock's not running. So we can make that a little bit more interesting, I think. We can do that by coming over to our sidebar, and in our sidebar it's part of the header and it's part of the timer. So if we open up our timer widget there, we can have a look at what we've got. So at the moment, whenever we tap, we have a pause button. We have the pause button within that widget, and if we come down to the pause button, whenever we tap it, it just stops the timer and closes the sidebar. I think what we want to do is check first of all whether there is an active timer. So whenever this widget is built, or whenever the timer becomes active or not, we want it to rebuild. We can say final boolean is active equals context watching what, the timer service, watching for changes, and we're watching for is there an active timer. Okay, so now within our on tap we can say if is active. So if we have an active timer, then we want to stop it. Else, we want to do something else. And in any event, we want to close the drawer. So what do we want to do if it's not stopped? Oh, sorry, if it is stopped, what do we want it to do? Well, I think we can get it to start an event. It would be another convenient way of getting the thing running again. So let's just take this line here, and instead of stopping, we're just going to add new. And it will do exactly the same as our little round button at the top of the app does. Okay, let's save that, come back to our emulator, and now if we click on this, we have a new event. And if we click on it again, it's not. Okay, Now we just need some visual sort of representation of that. And again, we can come down to our icon of the pause menu, and we now have this is active. So if it is active, then we will show the pause button icon, and if it's not, we will show the play arrow instead. Let's just save that, tidy that up, and there we go. That's now a lot better. We can click to start, and we have a new event. We can click to end. Brilliant. The next thing I want to tidy up a little bit is this. We can delete events. It's a little bit messy because it can go either way. So if we come to our event item, now we have this dismissible where we're doing a number of things here. And one of the things we can do is just prevent it from sliding both ways. And we can do that with the direction. And it's a dismissible direction. We've got a few options. We can set it to go up and down, left to right, right to left. But what we want to do is only for it to only operate in the end to start. So if we look at our emulator, the left-hand side is the start of the widget and the right-hand side is the end. We want it to be able to slide from the end to the start. So now we've put that in, we see that it still works. Need to save it, of course. It still works, but it doesn't slide. I can't slide it the other way. And that's a little bit neater and allows us to delete that. Okay, so far so good. Now those are the only little bug fixes and the tidying up thing I wanted to do. The major part we want to do is now get this edit button to work, because we have a load of events called new events, and after a day or so we're going to have no idea of what these represent. So editing is the next thing. So if we come over to our timer service and scroll to the bottom, let's put the code in first of all to actually do the editing. And it's very similar to what we've done already when we stop the timer. If you remember, when we stop the timer, we take the current active event and copy it, make some changes, and then resave that back to the index. Well, to edit the event, we're going to do pretty much the same thing. So we're going to create a function method called edit, and we're going to need to know which one we're going to edit, which one we're editing, because unlike the active one, it's not necessarily just going to be the active one we're editing. It could be any of them. So we're going to need to take in the ID, and we're also going to need to take in what it is we're editing, which is a string title, because that's the only thing we're allowing our user to change. Okay. So let's create our timed event, which we will call updated event. An updated event equals, and this might be long, so I'm just going to hide the emulator a second. Okay. So the updated event is going to equal your timed event first where the element, which we'll call E, the element ID equals the ID we've just passed in. So that's going to return from our list of events. That's going to return the one where the ID equals ID. Now we could do where. I put first where because I want to make sure I only get one back. There shouldn't be a case, as long as you've deleted the initial test data we've had, there shouldn't be a case where there's ever going to be more than one. Okay, so once we've got that back, we need to copy that with, and we're going to be changing the title to the title that we've just passed in. So we've now got a new updated event which has all the details from the same ID, except we've changed the title. And that's why in the last episode we set that up so we could do that. Okay, we also need the index, and we can copy what we've done up here. It's the same thing. We're going to get the index. It's not necessarily the current index, but it's the index where, and not where it's active, but where the ID equals the ID we've passed in. And then finally we can take our timed event at that index that we've just found, and we can make that equal the updated event. So we're replacing that index with this, we're replacing the event at that index with this event that we've just created, which is basically a copy of the index that was at that event at that index with the new title. Finally, we need to notify our listeners that we've had a change, and we need to save that change. Assist. Get rid of some of these spaces I've just put in to space things out so you could see. Okay, so that's the edit function, the edit method done, but it's not being called from anywhere. Where are we going to get it from? Well, let's look back at our emulator, and we have this pencil icon that we can use. And that's what we're going to do. When we click on that, I think what I want to see is a dialog box coming up, which allows us to make those changes. So we need to go back to our event item and find that edit icon, which is here. So at the moment, if it's an active event, we're showing an access time icon, and if it's a non-active event, we're showing the pencil. Either way, I think it doesn't matter whether it's whether it's active or not. I think we should allow our users to make that change. So what we're going to do is take this and icon, wrap it with a new widget, and we're going to wrap it with the icon button widget. That takes an icon rather than a child, so we'll just change that. And it also takes an on pressed. Okay, now we're going to run into a problem here, and the problem is that if we look at the emulator, our formatting has now gone out, and that's because the icon button takes or puts around a spacing that is part of the material design. It's the recommended minimum spacing, and really we shouldn't change that. In an ideal world we wouldn't mess with that. However, as developers, we don't always live in an ideal world, and sometimes we have to do what our designers tell us we're going to be doing. And so we're going to be doing something now which isn't brilliant practice, but we're going to override that spacing. Okay, in an ideal world, you'd take that up with the designer and get them to design it in such a way that this works with a bit more spacing. And the way we're going to do that is within the icon button, it can take in a constraints, box constraints, and instead of the default, we're going to set a max height to 25 and a max width to 25. And that will just shrink it down again. So like I say, not ideal. It's something we can do. Take it up with the designer. In our case, we're going to blame this on the designer and we're going to carry on. Okay, I'm going to get rid of the emulator again, just to make sure we've got plenty of room. I'm also going to get rid of my file list on the left. You can do that on Windows with Control B in Visual Studio Code, probably Command B or Option B on the Mac, I'm not entirely sure. Just so we've got some more visible space here. Okay, so what are we going to do when this is pressed? Well, what we want to do is show a dialog, and thankfully within our Material app we have the ability to do that. Show dialog. That takes a context and a builder, which takes the context in. Okay, so this needs to return a widget, and what we're going to return is the dialog widget. Now if we save that and now click on our pencil icon, we get a grey box. And in fact this isn't a grey box, this is the background of the dialog, or the barrier. Okay, let's take this further. So the dialog can have a child, which can be another widget, container. Oops, not alignment. And the container, I'm just going to set a width of 300 and a height. In fact, that's probably going to be too much. Let's take a width of 100 and a height of 200 and a color of white. And now when we hit our pencil, we have our box. Excellent. Now this height and width we're going to change up later on to be a bit more dynamic. It's fixed at the moment, but it won't be by the time we've finished. Now we can get rid of our dialog by just clicking anywhere on the background. Okay, so what do we want in our dialog? Well, I think within our container we want a child of a column, because I want a few things in here. Let's put in some placeholder text. First of all, I want a title or instructions, title, whatever. Let's put title. Then I want a field where we can edit the text, and then I want a save button, and then perhaps I also want a cancel button as well. Okay. You won't see the changes in the dialog until you've closed it and reopened it, but there we go. We've got our information showing up there. Fabulous. So let's start at the top. I think the title can just be the text edit title, and we can style it, make it bold, I guess. Text style, font weight, bold. Oops, that was not bold. That's bold. Okay, close it, open it. Yeah, that'll do. The next thing I'm going to do is ignore the middle bit and come down to our buttons. So I want two buttons and I want them next to each other, which means they're going to have to go into a row. So we're going to have a row of children, and we're going to have two elevated buttons. They take functions and a child, and the child for the first one is just going to be the text cancel, and for the second one is going to be save. Okay, let's bring the emulator back. Let's have a look at that. Okay, that's what we've got at the moment. So we're starting to get there. It's not quite right yet. Let's do something about the formatting, first of all, of these buttons. So what we can do is say main access alignment space between. Let's see how that looks. No. That's not going to work. Space around. Okay, that'll do. That will do. The other thing we want to perhaps do is change the color of these buttons, and I'm going to do that by putting style, and then I'm going to take the elevated, spell it right, elevated button, style from, and change the primary color to colors.red, I think, for the cancel button. Let's have a look at what that looks like. Get rid of it and bring it back. Yeah. And the blue button can stay as it is. Yeah, I'm happy with the blue button. So we want the cancel button to do something, and all we want it to do is close the dialog box. So we can do that with navigator.pop and pass in the context. Back to our emulator, close it, reopen it, and now the cancel button should work, and it does. Save button doesn't do anything yet, but it will do. The save button will in fact also close it, so we can take the navigator pop context and put it into the save button as well, because we're going to do something and then save. Okay, so that just leaves us with the issue of getting the text area working there, and thankfully that's not too tricky. All we need to do is use a text field. Save that, come back, and it's as simple as that. We've now got our button working and we've got our text field ready to go. Doesn't look great at the moment, so let's come back and fix some of that issue. Well, first of all, let's take the height off, because we don't need the height in that container anymore. Now that's not going to work straight away. That's actually going to make things worse. Why? Well, let's have a look at it. Yeah. If you remember, by default, columns and things and rows take up as much space as they can. And by taking the height away, we have now given it as much room as possible. So if we come to our column in our dialog, we can say that the main access size is main access size min, i.e. take up the least amount of space as possible. Okay. I think we want a little bit of padding as well. I think we want to put a bit of room around everything. How much room? Let's say in our container, padding const edge insert. Let's do it symmetric, and on the horizontal we'll put 16, and on the vertical we'll put 8. Let's see what that looks like. Close it, reopen it. Yeah, that's okay. And then the final thing I want to do is change the width so that it's not hard coded. And again, we've done this before. We're going to put media query of context. We're going to take the size, the width, and let's make it 80% of the screen again. So 0.8, let's try that. Let's see if that gives us enough width. Yeah, I think that's okay. So if the screen was wider, it would be wider, and if it was narrower, it'd be narrower. Maybe, no, I'm going to leave it like that. That's fine. And I am just going to put a little bit of decoration onto our container, box decoration. Now if you remember, when we put box decoration in, we can't have a color. We've got to move that color from outside the decoration to the inside of the decoration. But I also want to put a border radius of border radius circular 8. And that will just give us slightly rounded corners. Okay, so that's the layout done. We just have to get the functionality working now. So again, I'm just going to get rid of the emulator so that I keep flicking between screens to make sure that I'm not covering the code with my emulator. So now I've turned it off, I don't have to worry so much about that. Okay, so what are we going to do? Well, we've got this box popping up. We now need to get, when you click on the save button, we need to get the text. We need to do some validation to make sure that the text is okay, and then we need to save it. So in order to get the text from the text field, we have to give it a controller. We have to have something that specifies. And so we're going to create a controller, which we're going to call controller, or not. We need to create that controller. So right at the top of our build for our item event, we're going to come up here and we're going to create a text editing controller, which we're going to call controller, and that is going to equal a text editing controller. Okay, so this is a class. It's it contains a lot of information that we can use to access. It's like a key that we can use to access the controller. So in our text field, we've already specified that's the controller. And so now when we press, we can take the input text, and I'll move it to another string here. So I'll create a string called input text, and that is going to equal the controller.text. So whatever text is in the controller, that's going to equal. We could do all sorts of validation here. We could check for the length and all sorts of stuff. All I'm going to do is check whether it's empty. So I'm going to say if input text is empty, i.e. if there's no input text, we're going to return. We're not going to do anything. We're not going to allow empty text. Okay. And that's pretty much it, I think. What we need to do now is just update or call that method on our timer service. But accessing a timer service within the document, within the dialog, sorry, it's a little bit messy, to say the least. So what we're going to do is we're going to pop the navigator back, but we're also going to pop back. We're going to return a value as well, and that value is going to be the input text. And I'm also going to trim it here, and what trim will do is, you can use that on any string, is it'll just get rid of any spaces that are at the beginning or the end. It just makes it a little neater. Okay, so this is now going to pop back the value that's in that box. Where's it going to pop it back to? Well, the show dialog. The show dialog is a future, and it will get the result back once the dialog has been closed. And so what we can say is give us the result of the show dialog. but it's a future. It's not going to happen straight away. We need to await the result, and that means this whole function needs to be an asynchronous function, because we're saying it's not going to happen immediately necessarily. Okay, so now we're getting this result, and at this point we're showing a dialog, and we're going to wait until we get a result from that dialog. So if we come to the end of our show dialog, which is here, we now wait, and something else is going to happen. So what's going to happen? Well, as a test, let's just put print result, and we can see what happens. Let's bring our emulator back. Okay, and we need to close this and open it again to bring those changes in. But now if we type something in the box and we click save, we get null. Did I click save or did I just click cancel? I click cancel, click save. Why are we getting null? Okay, we're getting null because I've accidentally put the code in our cancel button. So if we come up to our cancel button and we take the string input and the string text there, in fact we take the whole lot and the navigator pop, and we copy that and put it into our save button, and then take the navigator pop without a return and put it up into our cancel button. Let's just be clear about that. Our cancel button, that's not the cancel button, our cancel button just has navigator pop context, and our save button does our validation and then pops with the input text. That was a silly little mistake, but we all make them. Okay, so let's try that again. Let's edit the title, put some random stuff in, and click save, and there we go. At the bottom of the code we can see that we're getting the result back. Okay, but we don't want the result back. That's not what we're after. Let's get rid of the editor again, edit emulator even. What we want to do now is just check that the result is not null. So if the result does not equal null, i.e. if the cancel button hasn't been pushed and we've got something back, and what we're going to do is take the context, read our timer service, and we've now got the edit. So we can pass the title, because the title is the result that we're getting. This is the new title, and the ID is the current event.id. We've already got that in the widget. If we look at the top, where is it? We're passing it in. Yeah, we're passing in the event ID at the top. So we're passing in the whole event even. That, I think, should work. So let's edit the second one and put something random in there and save. And there it is, it's updated. But I think we can do one more thing just to make it a little bit neater, and that is when we click on the edit icon, I think instead of having a blank box here, we should put the existing title in. And we can do that at the beginning of our show dialog box. So when we press the edit button, just before we show the dialog box, we can take our controller and the text, and we can make that equal the event.title. So it will equal the current event title. So now if we come to edit this GJH thing, Let's bring our emulator back. Let's have a look at that. So now when we click on edit here, we have our random text. If we click on new event here, we've got new event, and we can set that to new event A. We can set this one to new event B, and we can set this one to new event C. And we can still delete the events. That's still working. When we add an event, we get it, and we can actually use that to edit that event and call that new project. Okay, done well, done well. Finally, the last thing I want to change is, at the moment, none of these items do anything. And thinking about the future and where we might go, one of the things we're going to need to want to do is, if we log out, we want to clear all the data. And I'm going to do that now because it's also useful for testing, and we can just hit clear data and reset all the stuff. Okay, so how do we go about doing that? Let's bring back our files like that. There we go. And go over to our menu in the sidebar. So we've got these menu items, and the first thing we want to do really is pass into here a function of what to do when the button is pressed. We've not created the button yet, but we will. So to do that, we need to tell it to take in a function which is going to be optional, and it's going to be called onTap. Okay, we need to add it to the list. This onTap. It's not required, so I'm not putting required. And the reason I don't want it required is, at the moment, we're not putting in a function for all of them. Okay, and so what's going to happen is, if it's not there, it's going to be null. And actually, the way buttons and things work within Flutter is, if you've not passed in a function, they're just deactivated anyway. So we're going to take our row, and this time we're going to wrap it with a new type of widget, which we're going to call gesture detector. Spell it right, gesture detector. And that can take all sorts of things: on tap up, on tap down, cancel on secondary tap, all sorts of taps, long presses, all sorts of stuff. For now, we're just going to be using on tap, and we're going to pass into it the on tap function that we've passed in. Okay, if we save that and come back to our emulator, that makes all of these now clickable, but they don't do anything because we're not passing anything in. So let's come to our on logout function, sorry, our on logout button, and add in the on tap, which is a function. What do we want this to do? Well, we want it to go to our context, read our timer service, and call the clear all data method, which doesn't exist yet, but it will do. Clear all data. And I think the other thing I want it to do is, once it's done that, we want it to close the side drawer. So let's take the navigator and pop that off the current context. Okay, we need to load in provider. Let's just do that again. And now we need to come to our timer service and create this function, clear all data. So back to our timer service at the bottom, void clear all data. What do we want this to do? Few things, not too many. First of all, we want to check whether there's an active timer. So we need to check first of all that the timer is not null. and if it's not null and the timer is active, and at this point we know that it's not null, if that's the case, we're going to take the timer and cancel it. Okay, so if the timer is active, cancel. We're then going to take our list of timed events and set it to be empty list. We could set the seconds to 0, doesn't really matter. I think that's all we need to do. Save and notify listeners. Let's refresh that. Have a look at our app now. And so without any warning, as soon as we click log out, all our data is gone. Our events have gone, the timer is stopped, and we're ready to go again. And that sets things up for future development. There's all sorts of things you could do to make this improve this, including linking this to an online database. But as far as this little series goes, we're going to call it there. I don't think there's any glaring bugs left in it, and hopefully I haven't introduced any today. So if you've enjoyed, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and hit that notification button to be notified when the next project comes out, which will be in a little while, but not too far away. Until then, take care folks, enjoy your dev, and we'll see you soon. Bye now.